perhaps even if you don't read or speak English, you'll be able to get something out of this park, I think, because it's communicating things that are universal to all human beings.
I had a chance to visit with a number of African American visitors to the site for the dedication, and the one thing I heard uniformly was this is the first time that our story has been told.
When we as Americans can celebrate and relish our history, not just black history or white history or Native American, but again, as I say, it's our history, it's American history.
In 1862, Union troops marched through eastern Arkansas toward the riverport town of Helena. As the column of soldiers and military equipment journeyed through enemy territory, they were soon joined by slaves fleeing the desperate conditions of plantation life. Many of the men, women, and children who joined the Union troops carried what meager belongings they had in rickety old wagons. Others literally swam across the Mississippi River with nothing but the clothes on their back to join other freedom seekers. Each and every one of the slaves who joined Union troops took a leap of faith into the unknown with no guarantees of freedom. The only certainty was severe punishment if captured and a return to slavery should the South win the Civil War. One by one, the runaway slaves marched into Helena, Arkansas, with little more than hope in their hearts and a desire to be free. Just a few months after arriving in Helena, many of the men shackled by the bondage of slavery would soon be soldiers in the Union Army, fighting a battle for freedom. One of the early Civil War battles in Arkansas took place in Pea Ridge. The Union victory at Pea Ridge, led by General Samuel Curtis, allowed northern control of Missouri, while Confederates fell back to the Arkansas River Valley. 1 month later, Yankee troops marched south into what is now Mammoth Spring, occupying the town of Batesville, sending the soldiers as far south as Searcy, threatening the state capital of Little Rock. As Union troops made inroads into Arkansas, attempts to supply the Union Army via the White River failed. General Curtis made the unprecedented decision to march cross-country, living off the land and establishing supply lines along the Mississippi River.
So in July of 1862, the Army of the Southwest began marching across eastern Arkansas, raiding plantations, grabbing food where they can find it, and heading toward Helena, which is a major river port on the Mississippi River.
The sight of victorious Union troops marching across Arkansas inspired many slaves to escape the hopeless circumstances of plantation life and join the column of Union soldiers marching toward Helena.
While the Army marched across eastern Arkansas, thousands and thousands of slaves fled their plantation and began following the Army in hopes of a new life of freedom.
Instead of leaving the runaway slaves to fend for themselves, General Curtis offered protection to the men, women, and children to accompany Union troops into Helena. Curtis also offered the runaway slaves something more than sanctuary.
Curtis commandeered some printing presses and actually began printing emancipation papers for some of these freedmen as they helped the Army move across the trackless waste of eastern Arkansas. And these would be the first people freed by any Union Army in enemy territory.
On July 12, Union troops established a base in Helena that remained a major Union fortress for the remainder of the war. Not only did General Curtis have the responsibility of developing a Union stronghold deep in enemy territory, he had the task of dealing with hundreds of former slaves who had followed his troops into Arkansas.
Well, with the influx of freedom seekers into Helena, there had to be a place to put all of these people. So the Union Army established contraband camps.
The Army referred to escaped slaves as contraband of war. Slaves were property, And during war, you could appropriate property from the enemy, and that was called contraband. And contraband camps are just where you put contraband. I mean, that's where the people were, and that's what was here briefly.
The living conditions in the contraband camps were primitive at best, with families living in tents or small huts. Additionally, both troops and former slaves fought pestilence and disease, especially during the heat and humidity common in Arkansas summers.
Which, no matter how uncomfortable that must have taken a great deal of courage, because they were risking their lives. They were fugitives the minute that they stepped off of that property. And they were kind of taking a leap of faith into the unknown, one that the Army would protect them, that wherever they ended up, they might be able to become free individuals, that it would be a path out of slavery.
Despite the hardships, freedom-seeking slaves risked punishment and retribution from their former masters and continued to make the dangerous journey into Helena. At its peak, nearly 2,000 freedom seekers found their way into Union camps in Helena. In addition to housing, feeding, and caring for this massive number, General Curtis still had to fight a war in Confederate territory. Fearing attacks from rebel forces, Curtis hired some of the freedmen to build fortifications in and around Helena. Others were paid to work as cooks, stable hands, seamstresses, and laborers. For most of the former slaves, it would be the first paid labor that many of these folks had known. But more importantly, the former slaves now knew what it was like to be free. Soon, freedom would be something decreed by the President of the United States. President Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation. Lincoln's proclamation meant that men, women, and children in Helena, considered contraband of war, were declared as free.
But it was one that Lincoln felt was important to take. It changed the Civil War from a war just to preserve the Union to a statement that this is also a war to abolish slavery in this nation. And it was a time of there are records of great rejoicing among the African American population in town at that time. But it also meant, it was a responsibility to try to ensure that this freedom was realized.
But freedom could only be won through a Union military victory. The Declaration of Freedom set forth by Lincoln allowed black men to serve in the Union Army. Former slaves could now take an active role in the battle for freedom.
In April of 1863, Lorenzo Thomas, who was the Adjutant General of the United States Army, came to Helena. He had been dispatched with orders to start recruiting black men into Union Army regiments.
On April 6, Thomas held a rally asking former slaves to become fighters for freedom.
And the bottom line is that the next morning there were insufficient recruits to form the 1st Arkansas Infantry of African descent, the first African American troops raised in Arkansas. Ultimately, there would be 5,526 black men who would serve in Arkansas Union regiments.
I think that they joined the Union Army to take an active role in their freedom and the freedom of their families. I mean, why does any man join the Army? But, it's the opportunity to take decisive action, to do something positive, and to be a part of the struggle to free your race, and to be now that you're free and you're a soldier, you're part of the country. You're not just somebody's property. They probably felt like they were men for the first time. That other men recognized them as men.
Most of the early United States Colored Troop units in the North, they were free men. Again, I keep talking about Glory the 54th. Those were free men. And if you saw that movie with Denzel Washington, a slave coming and join that unit, that did never happen. That's Hollywood for you. They were all free men. But the units that were raised in the South were slaves. They were slaves that left the plantation, infiltrated the Union lines to join and fight for their freedom.
Following an intense period of military training, black regiments patrolled the Mississippi River. During one battle at Big Creek in Phillips County, the African American troops engaged in a 4-hour fight with Confederate soldiers. When asked if black troops were willing to fight, one Union officer responded, "Will they fight? Ask the enemy."
In July of 1863, though, Theophilus Holmes, who was the Confederate commander in Arkansas, devised a plan to attack Helena. The big issue there was Vicksburg, Mississippi. Vicksburg had been under siege for months by Union troops, and with the loss of Vicksburg, the Confederates would lose any hope of controlling the Mississippi River.
And on July 4th, 1863, Confederates attacked Helena to retake this city. This was the only Union-controlled area in the state, so it was really a kind of Union. It was just a Union stronghold here.
He set up a three-pronged attack with Arkansas troops attacking from the south, Missourians attacking from the north, and a combined Arkansas-Missouri division attacking from the center. By 10 o'clock in the morning, Holmes realized his attack was a failure, and the Confederates fell back, having lost about 20% of their number in the attack. Helena, the Battle of Helena was especially tragic for the Confederates in that it happened on the exact same day that Vicksburg surrendered to the Union. So the attack was really for nothing.
African American troops there was that hadn't really even been officially mustered in or had time to much train or drill were part of the force that defended that earthwork, and several of them died while they were there. A number were wounded.
The black soldiers that came in, or black men that were raised to be Union soldiers, these guys actually fought and served to be able to have the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the Constitution, which gave them citizenship, the right to vote, and protection under the law. And for their children, they wanted to educate and give their children a better life than what they could ever envision.
The main message from the service of the African American troops is that they took the opportunity to actually fight for their freedom. They did not passively sit by and wait to be freed. You know, these folks, they left their plantation. They took what had to be a tremendous leap of faith to go into the unknown, just in the hopes that something better would happen.
Civil War Helena tells a story, the important story of the people, black and white, male and female, Union and Confederate, who lived here during one of our nation's darkest and most defining moments.
150 years after Union and Confederate troops battled in Helena, young and old, black and white, gathered on February 23, 2013 to dedicate Freedom Park. The park is located on a piece of land that was once a refuge for hundreds of freedom-seeking slaves.
This piece of ground was where one of those contraband camps was, and that Helena became someplace that was a passage to freedom for thousands of people during the war.
It's been our desire over the years to try to represent those who have been unrepresented over the years. And the ladies that are with us also represent those women of African American descent who suffered and survived to keep our race and family and history alive during those years. As we stand here on the site of so much hope and again of so much suffering, I want us all to stop and remember why we're here. Keep those who are not here in your prayers, and the families and descendants of those families who are also here. And remember that this may be the 150th anniversary, but it goes on, the life goes on, the blood goes on, and our honor to you goes on. Thank you so much.
To commemorate the role African American soldiers played in the effort to win their freedom, members of the 13th United States Colored Troops from Murfreesboro, Tennessee, presented colors during the dedication ceremony. For member George Smith, the dedication of Freedom Park was more than just an opportunity to celebrate a significant moment in history. It is a chance to connect to his heritage on a deep level.
I think anybody who's a reenactor who does it long enough, you'll get a spirit. We say the spirits speak to us in terms of the desire for the story to be told. Anytime I have an opportunity, the 13th has an opportunity to come and talk about our freedom and talk about the story of the United States Colored Troop, we have to do it. We have responsibility. It's kind of like once you know the Lord and you sin, you know, you're responsible. You can claim before you know Him. You can say, I didn't know, but once the Spirit you've had the opportunity for the Spirit to embrace you, you have a responsibility to tell that story.
In addition to paying homage to the brave individuals who risked everything to be free, city and state officials hope Freedom Park will attract tourists and boost the local economy.
I look at it as tourists, bringing tourists in, and once the tourists, come in and take interest in the city, I believe it'll wake up everybody, and we all will join in an industry or relocate back this way, so everybody can, the city itself and community can be a whole again.
In 2012, Freedom Park was recognized as Arkansas's first national underground railroad network to Freedom Site.
With that designation, it brings a lot of attention, national attention to Freedom Park. It's publicized on National Park Service website. There's a conference that will be in Little Rock coming up, and they specifically asked to come to Helena to see and experience Freedom Park during a day trip as part of that conference. So with that designation, there's a level of prestige and pride that the community should be able to take advantage of.
The African American history of the Civil War has been ignored until, I would say, the last 40 years or so. Up through when the centennial of the Civil War was commemorated in the 1960s, it was the height of the Civil Rights Movement, and the commemorative activities that took place then were more focused on the reunification of the North and the South rather than this hidden story of what had happened to the millions and millions of people who had been held in bondage before then.
Okay, Freedom Park has 5 exhibits, and chronologically they really cover about a year, from the summer of 1862 through July 4th of 1863, which is when the Battle of Helena took place. But they're not really about so much particular events, but they are about the courage of the people involved in those events. We're sitting in Exhibit 1, which depicts events of the summer of 1862. A Union Army was marching from Missouri down through Arkansas, ended up in Helena. But as the Army marched through the state, enslaved individuals left their homes, which, no matter how uncomfortable that must have taken a great deal of courage, because they were risking their lives. They were fugitives the minute that they stepped off of that property. And they were kind of taking a leap of faith into the unknown, one that the Army would protect them, that wherever they ended up, they might be able to become free individuals, that it would be a path out of slavery. When they got to Helena, they had no food, they had, no jobs. They were kind of just here on their own. They established, with the help of the Army, a number of camps that they lived in, and that's what is depicted in Exhibit 2. One of the rough shelters that's in a photograph actually taken in Helena. The next exhibit is the Emancipation Proclamation, which President Lincoln issued on January 1st of 1863, and it was a military measure which gave really the promise of freedom, but of course claiming that freedom was going to depend on a Union victory. And the fact that many of the white men that had been enlisted had been serving since the beginning of the war. They needed men, and African American men were very willing to serve. And talks about Exhibit 4, where the beautiful bronze done by Roy Butler depicts the African American soldier. And the last exhibit, where we have sort of a reconstructed earthwork, which was actually on or near where it is over there. There was a line of earthworks that stretched from the levee all the way over to the ridge, which defended this entrance into the city. And on July 4th, 1863, Confederates attacked Helena. And so that kind of brings us to just a slice of what happened here in Helena. But as I said, it's not so much about the times, the dates. What's important is that at each step along the way, the people involved had the courage of their convictions, the courage to try to make a better life for themselves and their children and all those that followed.
Freedom Park, for the first time in Arkansas, and perhaps the first time in the South, will tell the entire story of what happened to African American people during the war. Freedom Park follows their story from their arrival in Helena in July of 1862, up into serving as soldiers, fighting at the Battle of Helena. The 2nd Arkansas Infantry of African descent helped hold the lines on the southern end of town, and ultimately up into the modern age, where perhaps the greatest symbol of their activities is that we now have a African American president.
And I think just by putting these exhibits out here and saying, this is part of our history, this is part of our community, that we want people here to know about, and that we want everyone to know about. We invite them to come and see this part of the story. I mean, as Helena is going to have a number of locations where different parts of their story are told, and this tells a part of that African American story that's been absent.
So the stories are still out there. This is an inception in terms of where do we start and how do we reveal the story of what happened. And as I mentioned, there are thousands of stories that are still yet to be told.
150 years after hundreds of slaves made the decision to journey into the unknown in hopes of being free, the city of Helena honors the bravery and resolve of freedom seekers. The land that once served as a refuge for former slaves is now home to Freedom Park, a permanent tribute to those courageous men, women, and children who risked everything to be free. Here, Americans from all walks of life can learn more about this untold story in United States history. It is a story that transcends race, heritage, and generations, describing the dreams, the sacrifices, and struggles of those that risked everything for one thing: freedom.
I mean, the goal here is to touch people emotionally, because it doesn't matter where you're from, what your background is. As I said, even just looking at some of these images, even if you don't read or speak English, you'll be able to get something out of this park, I think, because it's communicating things that are universal to all human beings.
So many African Americans do not embrace the Civil War period. In fact, members of my own family will frequently ask me, why you want to bring that up? That's a painful period. I don't want to know anything about that. And I tell them, you are dishonoring your own history. That is our history. You cannot change history. But we can certainly honor those individuals who fought for our freedom, because I'm here today because someone survived that period.
This is a park about the human spirit and about courage, and it's something that you don't really have to be from Arkansas or African American to appreciate what happened here. This is a story that anybody can relate to, and it's something that isn't told very much.
February is Black History Month, but it's the thought is, well, that's for them and black people to celebrate their history. It is American history. And so sooner than later, then, if we start embracing our history as black, white, Native Americans, or whatever else, this is our history. It's all a part of America.